Alrighty, hello and thank you to everybody for coming to our Jane Austen Tea and Talk for Jane Austen's 250th birthday anniversary. Yay! Thank you for joining and you're here. If you would like some tea or if you like some shortcake, there's some back up there. Feel free to help yourself as well over time. I would love to introduce Dee Rieber. Rieber, that's okay. Common mistake. Dee Rieber, my bad. She has come in beautiful Regency clothing. What's the name of your?
I'm wearing a gown and a pelisse. So these are two separate pieces. I don't know, we might want to turn the light on for this section of the program, but
I can.
So this was called a pelisse. This particular pattern that I made this one out of is actually fashioned after an original garment from the 1820s. So, there's a lot of things you could do with it. I chose to put the ruching here and also in the back. But it's an example of what would have been worn over a gown.
So you've made your outfit.
Yes. I am a seamstress and costume designer, as well as being a lifelong member of the Jane Austen Society of North America. Do we have any other members of JASNA here? Okay. Well, there is a JASNA. Yeah. It is throughout the country and Canada and, of course, the UK and across the world, really. Maine has had a region since the 1980s, early 80s. Cool. I have just been elected to be a co-coordinator for the region. I'm excited about that because when I retired down east in Winter Harbor. So what I've been doing is program coordinator up there to bring the organization a little bit, to provide opportunities for Janeites down east to get together. Nice. Because not everybody wants to drive 3.5 hours to Falmouth or Brunswick or Bath to participate there. So we are bringing Janeites of Maine together. Jane and Maine. So it's a pleasure to be here. I am looking forward to talking with you all. Yep. And maybe sharing your experience with Jane. First of all, I want to just get a feel for who I'm talking to here. How many have seen at least one movie adaptation of Jane's novels? More than one? How many have read at least one of her books? 2 books? 3?
I don't know. I can't remember.
All of them.
Okay, all of them. So wonderful.
Check that.
Well, as you probably know by this time, December 16th is Jane's birthday, her actual birthday, in 1775, the year before our revolution. We became the United States. And unfortunately, she did die pretty young in 1817. So we celebrate her 250th birthday today, which is really kind of rare that I'm actually doing a presentation on her birthday. So it's very special. So welcome again. And first thing I'm going to do is show you a CBS clip that just happened recently. Yeah. You'll see a couple of our Janeites march, sort of parading in the promenade at Bath. I don't know, how many have been to Bath, England? Okay. For the purpose of connecting with Jane or just for vacation?
I lived there.
Oh, okay. All right. So Bath is a big Jane Austen town. And every so often it explodes with the festivals and all of that. So this year was particularly busy over there with 2,000 Janeites marching in the promenade. And so 2 of our main Janeites actually got themselves in the film.
That's you.
That is me, just
put it on that
probably spam. So I'm just going to play it just to give you a little context, and then I'll give a short presentation about Jane and her time.
Jane Austen's writing remains as sharp, vibrant, and relevant as ever, even though her novels are now more than 2 centuries old. Seth Doane tells us about an author for the ages.
It might look like a scene from yet another Jane Austen production, and there have been a few.
My mother is determined to see me distinguished. Anything.
I hope you're not the only man to have noticed.
You have said quite enough, madam.
I perfectly comprehend your feelings.
But this was no set. It was a celebration of the author 250 years after her birth. The English town of Bath was channeling the early 1800s when Austen's novels were published. Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma were among those Anne Hearn grew up reading.
The issues that she speaks of, the economy, class, family, sisters, still so resonate with us today.
15,000 tickets were sold for this year's 10-day Jane Austen Festival, a level of enthusiasm that surprised even its organizer, Georgia Dell.
2 of her novels are based here, so you can walk in her footsteps down the streets. You've got character names on the streets, you've got places she visited, so it's just the feeling of being in that world that she inhabited that makes it so special.
She has written books that are endlessly rereadable.
Rereadable. It's not enough to read it once?
Well, I don't think so. There's something new to find every time.
Devoney Loser's ties to the author are not just professional.
My husband is also a Jane Austen scholar. We met and had a fight over Jane Austen the day we met.
What a love story.
Yeah, that's what he'd say too.
In her book, Wild for Austen, she argues the author is hardly plain, prim, and proper.
It's there in her writings. This idea of women being positively wild, unconventional, more free, more artless, and willing to combine feeling and thoughtfulness with intellectual ability. That this is the kind of thing she set out to celebrate in her heroines at a time where women were supposed to be ideally passive and not very thinking.
Austen died at 41 after suffering a range of ailments. She wrote just 6 novels, 2 published after her death.
You can read her on the level of the word, the sentence, chapter, plot, character, and appreciate what she's done in terms of craft. And on top of that, they're funny, and they're incredible works of social criticism.
We met Loser at the University of Southampton in England.
What are you presenting on?
Where this past summer, scholars and enthusiasts met to discuss all things Austen.
Reflecting on why Austen's work has such enduring legacy.
In the university's collection, among 7 million manuscripts and printed books.
This is Emma. Yes.
Printed in 1860.
1860.
Head of Archives and Special Collections, Karen Robson, gave us a sampling from this first edition.
Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her.
Lucky Emma.
Indeed.
You get so much in just this first sentence.
Absolutely. She's a wonderful wordsmith.
She publishes the first one, Sense and Sensibility, in 1811 as by a lady, and then after that as by the author of Sense and Sensibility.
But she didn't put her name on the book.
She didn't.
Why?
It's because novels in this period were not seen as high art. They were still seen as a kind of trashier genre.
So you didn't want to be associated with it?
She died before we know if she ever would have decided to put her name on something.
Loser likens Austen to Shakespeare, with the kind of staying power that takes form in those many adaptations.
And you approve of it?
Very much. I think there are few who would not approve.
But your good opinion is rarely bestowed and therefore more worth the earning.
These are not trivial recommendations, Mr. Knightley. Till men do fall in love with well-informed minds instead of handsome faces, a girl with such loveliness as Harriet has a certainty of being admired and sought after wherever she goes.
And there is the Austen-inspired, like 1995's Clueless, based on Emma.
You don't want to start off on the wrong foot now, do you?
I've got an idea. Let's do a makeover. No.
How are your spectacles?
Very well.
We were on the set of another spin-off of Pride and Prejudice, The Other Bennet Sister.
Perhaps I may be permitted to help you find what you're looking for.
I was looking for,
I think she feels like a very modern heroine. It's not a classic boy meets girl kind of story.
Jane Tranter is the executive producer of this BritBox series, which puts the often overlooked middle sister Mary Bennet at the center.
Why do we see so many adaptations of Jane Austen's work?
Jane Austen is the absolute master of a love story, of a kind of slow simmering, everything very proper, but kind of like boiling away beneath the lines of society. And we love that. And I think we love the period detail.
That was clear in Bath, where the past is very much alive and celebrated thanks to this author on her 250th birthday.
Why does her writing endure?
Because it's brilliant. Right? I mean, I think that's the glib, easy answer, because it's brilliant.
That just recently came out, so I thought I'd share it with everyone.
Charlotte Bronte, I think, said that passions are perfectly unknown to her.
Okay. So I think we're in good company here. No one here, doesn't seem like anyone here is a complete stranger to Jane's literature. I'm curious what it was like living. Did you grow up in Bath?
No. I just lived in England, southeast England.
Were you a Janeite at that time?
Pardon?
Were you a Janeite? Were you interested in Jane Austen when you were there?
No.
Okay. So yes, Jane was an amazing author, and we're just going to do a little exploration of her genius, her life, and her times, and a little bit about who she was. I wanted to share this with you. In 1975, when Jane turned 200, Great Britain issued a stamp of Emma Woodhouse and Mr. Woodhouse. This was issued in October of 1975. I just thought it was kind of clever. I'm not sure if they've issued one yet for this 250th commemoration or not. We'll have to find out. So, Jane's literary legacy. She did write at a very young age. She started writing. She wrote Love and Friendship, The Beautiful Cassandra, Leslie Castle, and Lady Susan. All examples of her early work. And then Sense and Sensibility was published in 1811 when she was 36. That's when she published her first book. Pride and Prejudice soon after that in 1813. Mansfield Park, 1814. Emma, 1815. And then the two that were published posthumously in December of 1817. So yes, Jane did die in July of 1817 at the age of 41 actually. And then Sanditon, if anyone has seen that series on PBS, was never finished and never published. But I will say PBS did a pretty good job of that series, if anybody saw it. I actually enjoyed it very, very much. So Jane was a small town girl. She grew up in a very small parish of Steventon. It was small then, and it is still small today. She was born in 1775. Some of her other places where she visited, London certainly on several occasions because her brother Henry lived there. And we know she shopped for fabric. I may put a little costume things in here every now and then, but we know she shopped for fabric here as well at what was known as Grafton House. And we know that because Jane Austen wrote copious letters, of which we have 161 available to us. All of the others, which are probably in the thousands, have been either destroyed or gone. But there is a lot to be gleaned from these letters. A lot of them were between her and Cassandra, her sister, who was 2 years older than she was, but they were really very, very close. And I find the letters fascinating because it really gives you, I think, even a stronger look into who she was as a person. She's not writing for someone to read it, except her sister. So they're very candid and full of interesting information. She also lived in the resort town of Bath. She was a visitor in 1797 and 1799, and then she lived there from 1801 to 1806 when her father retired. And she spent the last 8 years of her life in Chawton, where her oldest brother, Edward Knight, who took on the name of a family that sort of adopted him, and he became their heir. Well, part of his inheritance was Chawton House, and on the property of Chawton House was Chawton Cottage. And of course, when Jane's father, George Austen, died in 1801, in those days, if you weren't married and did not have some financial support, you were kind of left out into the, you were kind of like a candle in the wind. And so it was left to the men in your family, the brothers, uncles, whoever they might be, to sort of pick up the financial burden for your welfare. And that is exactly what happened with Jane, her sister Cassandra, whose fiance was killed. She had a small pension, but not much. The mother had a very small pension after the father died, but it was Edward Knight, the heir to the Knight fortune, that really helped them survive. And the other brothers chipped in also. They were naval officers, so they were able to help out in the financial well-being of the family. But it's interesting to note that her last 8 years of her life is when she did most of her work. She was 7. This came up the other day at the birthday celebration in Falmouth, how a person's security has a lot, their personal security has a lot to do with their professional abilities to produce, or to be productive in their careers or whatever. And this is certainly true of Jane. I mean, I think up to that point she was taking copious notes, where she lived, because 2 of her, as they mentioned in there, 2 of her novels take place in Bath, where she did live. But they moved around a lot, because pretty much as soon as they moved to Bath, the father dies, and he's buried there. So anyway, I think those years were probably not easy for Jane to focus on her work. And then she also spent time in Winchester, which is where she died ultimately, after a period of poor health. And she's buried in Winchester Cathedral. So just to get an idea here, this is not a great map, I will say that, but just to give you some context, this is Steventon, where she was born. This is London, which is about 60 miles away. This is Bath, which is 60 miles this direction. And Chawton is down here. And Winchester is her final resting place here. So Jane had a pretty small, as a lot of people did back then, just simply because travel was so difficult. She had a small sphere of life, but she was in probably the most populated, busiest area of England, certainly. So even though it was, her movement was not great, she had a lot to observe. She had a lot to choose from. And again, just to give you an idea, 67 miles between Steventon and Bath would have been about a 3 or 4 hour carriage ride. And, that's not like an SUV today. That's bumpy and muddy and who knows what. Not something you probably did very often. And then Steventon to London was pretty much the same amount of time. Steventon to Chawton was a 2-hour ride, and then Chawton to Winchester was another 2-hour ride. So just to give you some context of what that sort of sphere of her existence looked like. But she did definitely get around in that sense. She had brothers, and she had a brother in Bath, brother in London, and of course Edward Knight owned Chawton House. Yes, so Yeah, so it was the most populated area of England at the time. So her early education and exposure, her father was a minister, George Austen, rather, mild means, not certainly overly wealthy. Again, he was the minister for the Steventon parish, which was very small, and had about a population of, probably 100 or so people. And today it's 250. I checked the last census that was done. 250 people live there today, so it's still a rather small place. George was Oxford educated, and so what they lacked in financial ability was made up for in intellectual curiosity and support from the father, who encouraged both the two girls in the family, Cassandra and Jane, as well as the boys to pursue intellectual, learning. There was another son, George, the youngest, and at that time, many of you may know this, if you had a child with a mental disability or some sort of challenge, you looked for another family who could take care of them in many cases. And that's certainly what the Austens did. George was sent away to live with another family. I don't know if anybody saw Belgravia, but the same thing happened in that series too. It definitely happened, unfortunately, rather frequently. So again, Jane grew up in a very print-rich environment. I mean, there were lots of books. There was a lot for her to absorb, and she was a naturally curious person. And she and Jane, this also shows a lot of progressive thought on the part of George, because he sent them both to boarding school at a young age. They went to the Reading Abbey Girls' School in Berkshire, England, which was 26 miles from Steventon. And they were there from 1785 to 1786. Jane was 10 and Cassandra was 12, so they were still pretty young girls. Unfortunately, they came down with a serious case of typhoid and had to return home. And Jane nearly died from that. We don't know if some of the leftover residuals from that disease early on in life had something to do with her poor health and shortened life. It's quite possible. Typhoid was not it was a serious thing. So Jane, all her hard work and quick wit and clever insights, she never lived above the poverty level. In her lifetime, her monetary salary from publishing all 4 of her novels was £684, and that's like $64,000 today. That's in her lifetime. But society would have seen that as adequate for a single woman. There were definitely a lot of double standards back then, as there's no mystery here. And again, as I mentioned before, society's expectation in accepting, that low standard of living for an unmarried woman, and that some man would come forward to support them later on, was, in her case, absolutely spot on. That was the case. So the father, I said the father died in 1801. They moved in 1801, and the father dies to Bath. The father dies in 1805. So Jane, her mother, Cassandra, Martha Lloyd, which was a family friend, and later married one of her brothers, end up sharing a home rent-free, in the village of Chawton in Hampshire. So that helped them quite a bit. And Jane was 30 years old when her father died, and up to this point she still lived with them, whose income was about £200 a year, which wasn't much. And she received £20 a year from them. So after his death, clearly there was a lot of financial anxiety in the family, security, lots of thoughts and probably tenseness about that. And Edward, as I mentioned before, he was adopted by the wealthy Knight family inherited that solid estate, and he contributed a home for that. And the oldest brother, clergyman James was the oldest, sorry, made about 600 a year. And then the naval brothers, Charles and Frank's pay, military service pay, depended on if they were on assignment or not. And that was $3.30 a day for admirals. So then they'd get extra pay if they took prizes during wartime, which, if you know the story of Persuasion, that's how Captain Wentworth makes his fortune. So that's pretty common as well. So in 1810 in England, an annual income of 55 pounds or below was considered to be poverty level. And Jane's income averaged 40 pounds a year her whole life. So she was a product, like many other talented women of her day, a victim of her time. Certainly the royalties from all the movie adaptations of Jane Austen's novels would indeed make her a millionaire several times over today. And just case in point, Jackie Collins, who wrote 30 books in the 80s and 90s as movie series and adaptations, had a net worth of $150 million when she died in 2015. So who knows, if Jane had lived a little longer, what she would have done. So I'm just going to say a few things about Jane's awareness of costume and awareness of her personal appearance. She was not a frump in any way, shape, or form. She wanted to be fashionably relevant from season to season. She was an amazing seamstress. Had a great, we'll see some quotes about that in a little bit. But so she had the ability to alter what she already had, and she had the ability to, go out to places like London and shop for new ribbons and things like that. And one of the really interesting things about the letters to Cassandra is that there is a lot of back and forth about costumes and ribbons and refurbishing this dress and, doing this to this dress. They were friends. They were very best friends. And so this was one of the topics that appears quite often in the letters. So here's an example. In 1801, after arriving in Bath, Jane writes to Cassandra, "I find my straw bonnet looking very much like other people's and quite as smart." She also was she compared herself to other people, where she fit in with the rest of the world, which I think is just part of being from a small town. I kind of relate to that. I grew up in a very small farm town in southern Indiana, and being a seamstress from a very young age, I always wanted to create things that would not make me look like I was from a farm town in southern Indiana. I wanted to, and I think Jane had that too, and her experiences in London and Bath exposed her to the rich and famous, because Bath was a playground for the rich and famous. The Roman baths were there. That was like a resort town. I understand they're not there anymore, right? The Roman baths are no longer functioning, but anyway, it's still a great resort town. So she was able to see and witness what other people were doing, and very observant. And this next quote, "We must turn our black pelisses into new, for velvet is to be very much worn this winter." And that's another letter to Cassandra in 1808. And again, in 1814, "I have determined to trim my lilac sarcenet with black satin ribbon, just as my china crepe is. 6D wide at bottom, 3D, this is designer talk. She's putting it, how much are going to need, ribbon trimmings are all the fashion at Bath. And I dare say the fashions of the two places are alike enough in that point to content me. With this addition, it will be a very useful gown, happy to go anywhere." So again, she's checking it out. She's not going to allow herself to be anything but, by society standards, relevant fashion-wise. And Bath, again, speaking of Bath, because I think Bath had a huge influence on Jane's fashion IQ, but also her ability to see people and observe people's behavior, especially the affluent. And I think she did a lot, like I said, copious notes were taken during these times of not writing specifically, but just building up. So when those novels came in her later 30s, they came boom, 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 boom. Lucky for us, because she wasn't around very long, which I find is very interesting. But anyway, she had it in her, and there they flowed out. So in 1801, that was when the first census was done in England. There were 40,000 people in Bath. So Steventon, 100 maybe, 125, Bath, 40,000. You know, whoa, what a, you know, it's like for anyone who's curious about life, a writer who wants to emulate society on the page, it was a feeding frenzy for Jane. And again, we know she shopped for fabric in Bath because it's in the letters to Cassandra. And her parents, I think this whole town of Bath had a lot of lore within the Austen family because her father and mother were married there. They honeymooned in Bath. The father retires to Bath in 1801, and the father dies in Bath and is buried in Bath. So I think there was probably a lot of talk about Bath within the family even before Jane reaches the age of 5 or 7. You know, she already had Bath in her DNA to go there, and so she did. Right, so I already mentioned this. I'm just going to skip over this. So Bath, you know, what's not to love? Beautiful town. I've not been there. You had the opportunity to live there, but it was the home of the Roman thermal baths, which drew lots of people from lots of places around Europe, especially. And so it did become sort of this cosmopolitan hub. Certainly in Jane's day, it was. You could see a very beautiful city. So again, despite her income, Jane had her clothes made from local dressmakers, and she sent them out to be laundered as well. So for somebody on a really tight budget, she was not compromising that, which I think speaks to her need to be relevant. We know her dressmaker in Steventon spent 11 days creating a dress from fabric that she and Cassandra bought. And there was a lot of back and forth about this fabric in letters. And she writes to Cassandra, she says, "Your abuse of our gowns amuses, but does not discourage me. I shall take mine to be made up next week, and the more I look at it, the better it pleases me." And then a week later, Jane writes again, "I cannot possibly oblige you by not wearing my gown." Now remember, this is the same fabric. They bought the same fabric. "I cannot possibly oblige you by not wearing my gown, because I have it made up on purpose to wear a great deal, and as the discredit will be my own, I feel the less regret. You must learn to like it yourself and make it up at Godmersham. It may easily be done. It is only protesting it to be beautiful. You will soon think it so. Do it, do it, do it. Make the damn dress." And I wonder what Cassandra was thinking, you know. Maybe Cassandra didn't want to dress out of the same fabric as her sister. Maybe she was having buyer's remorse about the fabric. Who knows? But I just find that I have 5 sisters, so I can kind of relate to this. She doesn't want to hurt Jane's feelings, which I'm not sure is possible, actually. Jane is pretty sure of herself. So anyway, once the gown is done, you know, Jane writes back, "Miss Summers has made my gown very well indeed. I grow more and more pleased with it." And then once it was made, Jane got several opinions about it, of course, because she needs that sort of, you know, reinforcement. Martha Lloyd's opinion of the gown in Jane's words. She is pleased with my gown and particularly bids me say that if you could see me in it for 5 minutes, she is sure you would be eager to make up your own. Again with the dress. Give it a rest. I just think that's a funny little anecdote. So we have, 250 years later, one thing that we're pretty sure 98% belonged to Jane and was worn by Jane. It is a pelisse, or a robe, you might say. This is a picture of it. It is housed in Steventon. And one of our authors today, modern day author Hilary Davidson, went to the museum and actually took it out and measured every little piece of it. And she recreated it, which I'll show you her recreation. But again, we think it's from between 1812 and 1814, gifted by the Austen family. It's in the Hampshire County Museum Services. Made from English manufactured twill sarcenet silk, white tabby weave, again, this is all designer talk, sewn with yellow silk thread, gold silk cords trimming the cuffs and down front, and it had that ruching on the collar. Kind of similar to what I have here, not quite, but similar. And it was a patterned oak leaf, which was very popular, patriotic motif in that time period during the Napoleonic Wars. And it had an open front and it was not fastened. There were no hooks.
It says it was donated by a family descendant. Who was the family descendant?
I think it was her niece.
Her niece?
But I'm not quite sure about that. Yeah.
So like Cassandra's daughter then?
Cassandra had no children.
No children?
Neither did Jane.
She had brothers though, right?
Yes, she had brothers. So it would have been one of the nieces.
Okay.
Yeah. Who really loved Jane, and understood her genius. So they did take care of her legacy in many ways. So this is Hilary Davidson, who's an author today, who did a reproduction of the robe. Not bad, not exact, but maybe as close as we can get. But I thought it was interesting because one of the things she did was when she was measuring it, she came up with some measurements for Jane. Like, how tall was Jane? How big was Jane? Well, she said she was about 5'7" to 5'9", so that's pretty tall, especially for then.
Would that have been very tall for the time?
Yes, it would have been. A 34-inch bust, 24-inch waist, and 34-inch hips. Now, when I researched measurements of today's top runway models, ta-da! Jane could have been a top runway model today. Pretty amazing. I mean, kind of interesting, but they walked everywhere. So, they just got a lot of exercise. Here's some other examples of period pelisses. Like what I'm wearing is a pelisse. That would have been called a pelisse or a robe. And here are some other examples. It was a very popular garment during the day. It was good for warmth, primarily. Just some of the pictures I threw in here. And then, of course, shopping for fabric. I'm really not going to get into this too much, but there was a place in London called the Grafton House, which was a pretty popular spot for buying fabrics. And since Edward lived in London, she could walk there in about 45 minutes, so it's an easy walk to get.
I'm curious, your hat that you've made, I'm sure is very much like what I've probably seen in some adaptation or whatever, but some of the bonnets that we've seen so far in your presentation are quite different. Was there, it indicates married, not married, a certain age, or was it just simply the person's preference?
Really the person's preference.
Okay.
Yeah. Jane actually had a hat similar to this. In one of the very few pictures that was a drawing by Cassandra, she's wearing what's the name of it? It's got a bill on it, but it has this kind of sort of puffiness in the back.
And was it typical to wear a brooch on the hat, or that was your choice?
It's my choice. Sometimes feathers.
Yeah.
There's a thing about fruit and feathers. That's kind of, don't do fruit and feathers. Just do feathers.
Don't wear white before.
Flowers and feathers, choose one or the other. So somebody had this concept of things getting a little too busy. Unlike the Edwardian period where it was hats off. I mean, whatever you wanted to put up there, stick it up there and see where it goes. So in 1813, Jane writes, "We must have been 3/4 of an hour at Grafton House," which is actually not a long time to be in a fabric store for a designer, honestly. Edward sitting all by the time with wonderful patience. The edging there is very cheap. I was tempted by some. I bought some very nice, but she goes into what she bought. And then she went back to Grafton House, 1850, she came back. And this is just an example of what a fabric store might have looked like, with all the textiles, hanging down. As I mentioned before, there is evidence to suggest that Jane was quite skilled with needle and thread. Her niece, Caroline Austen, wrote, "She was a great adept at overcast and satin stitch, the peculiar delight of the day." And her nephew, James Edward Austen Lee, her needlework, both plain and ornamental, was excellent and might almost have put a sewing machine to shame. That's pretty high regard. So again, the pictures we have of Jane, very few. This was a watercolor portrait that was done by Cassandra in 1804 when the family lived in Bath. And it's one of only 2 incontestable portraits in existence of Jane. And there you can see that sort of Empire style dress. You can see she's tall. I mean, she kind of even looks tall in that picture. And she's wearing one of those bonnets with the, bag bonnet. That's what it's called. It had sort of a bag in the back and a straw bill. I mean, we can't really glean too much from this picture, except maybe she liked the color blue, and she is, appropriate for the period in terms of fashion-wise. And this is the other picture, which, by the way, the original picture, the one on the left, was 4.5 inches by 3 1/8 inches. Now, how much you can tell from that, unfortunately, probably not much, but it was a pencil drawing by her sister Cassandra in 1810, and it's now at the National Portrait Gallery. And of course, from this picture, we get all kinds of other ideas about what Jane looked like. Those are just 2 of them there, but those come from that picture. It's like a stylized version of Jane. And this was taken in 1789, so Jane was, a budding teenager, and that was commissioned by a great uncle, Francis Austen, and painted by Ozias Humphrey. So, my friends, this comes to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but I noticed in your list of books, you don't list Northanger Abbey, or is it Northanger Abbey?
Northanger Abbey?
Northanger Abbey.
Yeah, I did. I think that was
wasn't in there?
I think that was one that was published posthumously. Let's go back and just see, but I'm pretty sure that was one of them that, yes, you're right, I don't put it in there, but it was with...
I was just curious if there was a reason for that, because it's certainly not the same grade as some of her other...
Actually, no, I mean, I really should, thank you, because I really should be here with Persuasion, because they were both, those were the 2 that were published posthumously.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
That I don't like it as well as her other books. However, it's such a fun take on how it was shameful to like novels.
Right. I think a lot of people would agree with you on that in terms of, the popularity of that one. I think there is about to be a new
They're doing a new Pride and Prejudice.
a new Pride and Prejudice and a Sense and Sensibility, I think.
Oh, really?
And I heard that maybe the Northanger Abbey is going to be redone as well. So
I
we'll see.
wish they would redo Persuasion. That is my favorite.
You can't mess with Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
Oh, no, no.
I think
Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters?
Somehow that does not surprise me.
There's a movie too for the zombie one.
I mean, this is the thing about Jane's. It's so, this is the thing about her and the fan fiction. I mean, there's tons of fan
So
fiction out there. Some good and some not so good. But this is the thing about Jane. She will continue to be a part of people's lives through movies and books and podcasts and, all of it.
I would recommend The Other Bennett Sister to read. I thought it was quite entertaining.
Oh, okay.
That is a good
to know.
book.
Yeah.
That is good.
Has anybody seen the film? I mean, the
I don't think it's
I don't
out
think
yet.
it's out yet.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I have BritBox.
I'm
Okay.
seeing
I've seen
promos for it, but
Well, in October, I went to what we call the annual general meeting of the Jane Austen Society. It was on the Baltimore waterfront, and 950 Janeites are there. It was a big year because of the birthday celebration. And Susanna Harkin was there. Now, she played Jane Bennet in the 1995 Pride and Prejudice. She was there, and they did an interview with her, and that was delightful. And she's, approaching, I guess.
was that the
60.
Colin Firth version?
Yes, yeah. And so she's coming out with a new project also.
Oh.
Now that she's approaching, 60, I think, at this point. And her stories about the movie were very fun. I'm trying to think of one of the little anecdotes that she shared, but delightful woman, very delightful. As sweet and attractive in person as she was in the film. Actually, more so, because she had a weird, funky hairdo.
Oh, that was horrible.
Oh, it was disgusting. Yeah, it was terrible. And she said it took them hours. So everybody else got to sleep in. She had to go get her hair done and everything, like hours before she had to appear on set. But that was really great. That was the highlight of the weekend. And also, Caroline Knight was there. Now, Caroline is the fourth great niece of Jane Austen. She comes from the Edward Knight side, and she grew up in Chawton House. She was the last generation to grow up in Chawton House, surrounded by many of the same things that Jane Austen would have been familiar with. She had a little pop-up museum there. She brought a piece of china that Jane Austen's family would have eaten off of, and they ate off of too as a child. She's probably in her early 50s at this point. But she was delightful, and she's written a book, and I cannot remember the name of it, but something growing up in the shadow of Jane, I don't know, something like that. But it was just so fascinating to hear her talk about it. And the reason she was the last generation is that there was just no money in the family, like so many of these great estate houses, to keep it up. So now it's a museum, and I understand it's focused on British, I believe, women authors. So it's become sort of I think Jane would have appreciated that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sounds like a family.
Yeah, but I think she tells a story of her grandfather, Edward Knight, who the home really went to be a museum under his generation, and how that was very hard for him. There was apparently a very large portrait of Edward Knight, Jane's brother, that had to be sold at auction to help pay for certain things. And I think she said that always sort of got to his heart. But very interesting, you don't realize what kind of burden living in one of those huge places can be. Any other questions or comments or?
Well, it was really interesting in your presentation where they said that they compared her to William Shakespeare. When my son was in 8th grade, I decided that he had to read Pride and Prejudice. And we read it together because the language is a little bit tough for young people to read nowadays. Like, it didn't bother, like, I read it when I was young, but the language is a little archaic, and there was a lot in the novel that people today don't understand, as far as, like, why Mrs. Bennet was so obsessed on getting all of her daughters married, you know, not that kind of stuff. And the funny thing is that we read it together, and we would stop, and he didn't know what some words were. But when he was in high school, you know, they did Shakespeare, did Romeo and Juliet, and he was the only one in his class that understood the Shakespearean English. And he said it was because he had read Pride and Prejudice. So I thought that was kind of interesting, you know, that she was compared to him.
Yeah. I think too, just on a longevity scale.
Yeah.
You know, obviously Shakespeare's a century or 2 centuries almost older than Jane.
Right.
But I have a feeling 2 centuries from now, Jane will still be, we'll still have more adaptations of her.
Well, I think because the actual stories themselves really do speak to people, and like I always taught Pride and Prejudice, and I taught high school, and I taught the classics, because I felt like people should know those classic stories, because they don't realize how much of what they watch today comes from some of those stories, you know. But I would always incorporate it with the movie, because to just read the novel by itself is tough. And boy, the kids really got into Pride and Prejudice. You know, I had one girl that, like, you know, put Matthew McFadden on her screensaver, and she was in love with Mr. Darcy. She wanted to marry Mr. Darcy, you know. And at one point, we did, like, they had this online quiz, which I wish they still had, where you would take it and it would tell you what character you were from the book. And one of the girls got Mrs. Bennet, and I thought for sure that she would be horrified by that. And, you know, we talked a lot about the thing, and we did that at the beginning. And then part of their assignment was when they got to the end, like at the end of the course, they had to write an essay on who the quiz said they were like, and if it was true or not. And she did this whole essay on, well, you know, of course I'm like Mrs. Bennet, because I would want to make sure that all of my children were taken care of. And, you know, she really got the idea of why Mrs. Bennet was so obsessed and so obnoxious. And then I had another kid who he was picked as Mr. Wickham. And he went into this whole thing about, well, you know, Mr. Wickham is really shallow and pretty. And you know what? I'm 16. I am shallow and pretty.
Oh.
You know? Yeah, and he just did this whole, I wish I had saved it, because it was such a
delight
essay on, you know, so they really identified with the characters and with the, you know, even though a lot of this, you know, a lot of the things about that you have to be married, and but I think you're right that Jane's idea that women can be strong and independent really comes through, and that's, I think, why her characters endure, because they're not the women that they're supposed to be in that time period.
Yeah. And I will say that at AGM this year, I saw more men than I've ever seen before. I've been to 3 of them now. And there were more young men, Kyle, than ever before. This would be a good place to segue and thank Kyle and Cody for all your coordination.
Yes,
today's
definitely.
event. Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming on short notice.
And if you're in contact with young people, the Jane Austen Society membership is free to students from now till the end of the year.
Oh, that's good.
Because of the birthday.
Well, before I came over, I tried to convince Kirsten and her worker to come, and my daughter has Down syndrome. She's in her 20s, and she has a worker, and Camden's in her, I think she's 22 or 23, and I said, have you ever seen Pride and Prejudice? And she's like, no. I'm like, oh my gosh, we are watching it together, because you have to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again.
How many belong to your group in the state here?
So we have about, I would say, 70 to 75 members of the Jane Austen Society of Maine. It's growing, and now that we're also down east, and sort of cultivating the society up there as well, it's growing. It's still primarily a sisterhood, but my husband has agreed to come to Tucson next year for the annual general meeting, so that should be interesting. And I mean, the annual general meeting is 24/7 Jane Austen for a weekend. It may not be for everyone, I dress every day. I mean, that's my sort of thing when I go there. I take costumes for every single day. Every day I get up, I get dressed. Sometimes I wear 2 outfits a day. That's what I like to do. And also there are a lot of seminars, there are a lot of classes. I mean, the level of Jane Austen minutia and interest is incredible. A lot of academics there, talking on various subjects, from hunting homes. I went to a workshop on hunting houses, which was very interesting. Hunting houses of the day were really cultivated to keep the fox population down, because back then they were a nuisance, and you depended on your farms in that kind of society. So that was very interesting, as it related to Willoughby almost in Sense and Sensibility, because he was a big horseman, and which is ultimately why he married the other woman, because she had money to help him keep up his habit of horses. He was into his horses. So anyway, but there's just a lot of different things, and interesting things that go on. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you all. I know it's a holiday week, and there are so many other things you could be doing today. So thank you for joining us here at this wonderful library, this beautiful treasure in Maine. So thank you so much. Nice meeting you.